All right, everybody, welcome to another deep dive. You ready to get focused? We got a ton of research here, all about how to sharpen our focus in this crazy, distracting world we live in.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking all about this podcast episode, The Power of Focus, eliminating distractions in a digital world. And man, some of this stuff is wild. Like, did you know our average attention span is shorter now than a goldfish's?
It's true. And, it's kind of scary when you think about it. We're just bombarded with so much information these days, right?
Right.
Notifications and everything. Our brains weren't really made for this nonstop stimulation.
Exactly. And it's not just about like getting stuff done. This episode is saying it's about living a more meaningful life, period.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's a pretty big claim,
It is.
but I'm definitely intrigued. So where do we even start with all of this?
Well, the main thing is understanding that focus isn't some magical thing that some people just have and others don't. It's like a skill.
Okay,
And like any skill, you can train it.
gotcha.
Just like you build muscle, the more you work at it, the stronger your focus will get.
So it's not about willpower then. It's about like training specific parts of our brains.
Exactly. Like your prefrontal cortex, which is the part that handles planning and decision making. It's super important for focus. And you can actually strengthen that area with practice.
Okay, so no more beating myself up when I get distracted.
Yeah.
It's all about building that mental muscle.
Right.
But what about when you're just like totally sucked into your phone?
Yeah.
Is that just a weakness?
Not necessarily. There's a whole science behind distraction. This podcast talks about how our brains are wired to want those quick hits of dopamine like we get from those notifications and social media.
Right.
It's like the same reward system that gets triggered when we win a game or eat some delicious food.
So basically, our brains are tricking us into thinking that checking Instagram is as important as finding food.
Kind of, yeah. Each notification gives you this little burst of dopamine,
Oh, wow.
which just makes you want to do it more and more. And it's not just the pleasure. It also uses our natural curiosity and, we hate uncertainty. Or like, I got to check just in case I'm missing something.
Yeah, that explains why I'm constantly refreshing my inbox.
Right.
But what's the real cost of all this task switching? Like, besides feeling kind of scattered? I mean,
Well, there's something called the cognitive switching penalty. Every time you go from one task to another, your brain has to reorient itself, and that takes time and energy. It's like if your brain's a car engine switching gears all the time, just wastes gas and wears it down.
that's a good analogy.
Yeah, and studies actually show we lose up to 40% of our productive time with all this task switching.
40%, that's like a whole workday every week. No wonder I feel so drained by the end of the day.
Exactly. And it's not just time either. All that switching leads to decision fatigue. Our mental energy gets used up, so it's harder to make good choices throughout the day. Have you ever noticed how your willpower just crumbles at night?
Oh, tell me about it. After a day of juggling work and emails and trying to like keep up with the news, all I want to do is order takeout and just zone out.
Totally. Makes sense.
Yeah.
But the good news is this podcast doesn't just point out the problem. They give us a bunch of strategies to get our focus back.
Okay, give us the good stuff.
Yeah.
How do we escape this dopamine-fueled task-switching craziness?
Well, they outline 6 strategies, and it's all about being more intentional with our attention. The first one is designing your environment for focus, like setting yourself up for success.
So like no working from my bed surrounded by snacks and half-finished projects.
Exactly. The podcast suggests putting your phone in another room when you're working, decluttering your workspace, having a spot just for focused work. Even noise-canceling headphones can make a difference.
Makes sense.
Okay, what's next?
It sounds simple, but it's often overlooked. Setting clear goals.
Okay.
Start each day by picking 1 to 3 things you want to get done.
Mm.
It gives your mind a direction and helps you avoid getting pulled into less important stuff. So instead of just reacting to whatever's in my inbox, I should decide what really matters and focus on that.
Exactly. Be proactive with your attention, not reactive. If you know what you need to do, you're less likely to get lost in all those distractions.
All right, that's 2 down. What else?
All right, have you heard of the Pomodoro technique?
Yeah, I've heard of it, but never actually tried it. Isn't it kind of rigid?
Well, it's really simple. You work for 25 minutes, then take a 5-minute break. You do that 4 times, then take a longer break.
Okay.
And it actually helps train your brain to work in these focused bursts, which is how our attention naturally works anyway.
Oh, interesting.
And the regular breaks prevent burnout and help you stay fresh.
I might have to give that a try. But what about all those digital distractions? How do I resist social media?
That's where digital boundaries come in. Turn off non-essential notifications, set up focus times where you completely disconnect, even make phone-free zones in your house.
Like declaring my dining table in no phone zone.
Exactly.
That's going to be tough.
It might be
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, what else?
mindfulness.
Okay.
And no eye rolls. It's not about becoming a meditation master. It's just being aware of your thoughts and feelings without judging them. Even 5 minutes of mindful breathing can help.
Okay, 5 minutes I can handle.
Yeah.
But how does that help with focus? Exactly.
It trains your brain to notice when you're getting distracted without getting carried away by it. It's like your mind is a busy highway. Mindfulness is like standing on the side watching the cars go by without jumping into one.
Oh, that's a good one.
So instead of getting sucked into every thought, you can just observe it and let it go.
Okay, I'm starting to feel more zen already.
Mm.
What's the last strategy?
This one's about becoming aware of your digital habits. A screen time audit. You use those tools on your phone or computer that track how long you're on different apps and websites.
You mean those things that tell me I've spent like 5 hours on social media?
Yeah.
Ouch.
It can be a wake-up call for sure. But the point is to become aware of where your time and attention are going. And then you can set some limits and choose how you really want to spend your time.
This is making a lot of sense. It's not about avoiding technology. It's about taking control and using it in a way that works for me.
Exactly. The power to focus is within you. It's about understanding how your brain works, knowing your patterns, and using strategies that help you reach your goals.
This is great. Now, I'm really curious about this deep work concept they talk about.
Yeah.
Is that just like next level focus, or is it something different?
Yeah. It's definitely more than just focusing for a long time. Deep work is about taking intense, uninterrupted blocks of time to work on stuff that really requires a lot of brain power. It's like getting into a flow state where you're totally immersed and distractions just fade away.
Sounds intense.
Yeah.
But this podcast makes it sound like deep work is the key to unlocking some hidden potential. What kind of results are we talking about here?
Think like solving tough problems, doing work you're truly proud of, and tapping into a level of creativity you didn't even know you had. It's about pushing your brain to the max and reaching a level of mastery that's just not possible when you're constantly distracted.
Okay, I'm sold.
Yeah.
But how do you actually do deep work? Is it just finding a quiet room and locking yourself away for hours?
There's a little more to it than that. The
Yeah.
podcast gives some practical tips for making deep work part of your life.
All right, tell me. How do we make this deep work magic happen?
The first step is scheduling specific blocks of time for these focus sessions. Put it in your calendar and treat it like it's unbreakable.
So no emails or social media during deep work time.
Exactly. Create a ritual, a time and space just for this deep work.
Okay, schedule it, eliminate distractions. What else?
This is important. Communicate with others. Let your coworkers, family, roommates, whoever know that you're off limits during these times. Set clear boundaries to minimize interruptions.
Makes sense. So it's about setting up a supportive environment, both inside and out. But is there any proof that this deep work stuff actually works? Or is it just another trendy productivity thing?
Oh, it's definitely more than a trend. The podcast tells this great story about a software engineer named James who was totally drowning in distractions.
Ooh, a real life story. I love those. Tell me more.
Well, James was struggling to meet deadlines. He was overwhelmed with emails and messages and notifications, constantly switching tasks, feeling exhausted, and his work was suffering.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, so he decided to try out these focus strategies, and the results were transformative.
So he went from overwhelmed to super focused coding ninja. Tell me everything. What did he actually do?
Well, he started small, incorporating some of the things we talked about. Like he started using the Pomodoro technique to have focused blocks of time for coding. He muted all notifications and even set expectations with his team about when he'd be available.
Simple enough, but did it work?
It totally did. Within a
Oh.
few weeks, his productivity shot up. He was getting more done, the quality of his work was way better, and he felt more in control and less stressed. He was like rediscovering the joy of focused work.
That's amazing. It's inspiring to hear that these strategies actually make a real difference.
Yeah, definitely. James's story proves that we can all reclaim our focus and reach our potential even with all these digital distractions around us.
So if James can do it, we can too.
Absolutely.
But maybe we should take a break, let all this sink in.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. Let's pause for a bit, and when we come back, we'll explore even more strategies for a calmer, more focused mind.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Listeners, grab a glass of water, maybe try that 5-minute mindfulness thing we talked about, and we'll be back with more focus-boosting goodness in a bit.
Welcome back, everyone. Feeling a little more zen. We've already learned so much about focus, but I'm ready to take it to the next level.
Me too, and the podcast has more for us. They talk about this idea of intentional focus, which I think is super important these days with all these things fighting for our attention. Intentional focus. So it's not just focusing, but like choosing what we focus on. Okay, I'm liking this already.
Exactly. It's being proactive with your attention, not letting all the outside stuff control where your mind goes, but you deciding what you want to focus on and making sure it aligns with what you care about and your goals.
Yeah.
It's like taking control of your mental dashboard.
Like being the captain of your own attention ship instead of just letting the waves toss you around.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do that? Any tips from the podcast?
Yeah, one thing they suggest is pre-commitment. It's basically setting a clear intention before you start doing anything. So let's say you're about to check your email. Before you even open it, you decide, okay, I'm going to spend 30 minutes max on this, and then I'm moving on to my most important task.
So it's like making a mental roadmap for your attention. This is where we're going, and this is how long we're staying.
Yep. You set boundaries and give your brain clear instructions. Another technique they talk about is single tasking. It might sound crazy in our world of doing a million things at once, but focusing on one thing at a time is actually way more efficient and effective.
Wait, so you're telling me I shouldn't have 10 tabs open, be texting my friend, and writing a report all at the same time?
Well, the research is pretty clear on this one. Multitasking actually divides our attention, so we're worse at each individual task. It's like trying to run in 5 directions at once. You might look busy, but you're not really getting anywhere.
I can see that. So it's quality over quantity when it comes to attention.
Right.
But this all sounds pretty intense. Do we ever get to take a break?
Of course. The podcast talks about mindful breaks. And it's not just about getting away from your desk. It's about doing it mindfully. So instead of grabbing your phone, try taking some deep breaths, going for a walk, or even just looking out the window.
So like a digital detox, even if it's just for a few minutes.
Exactly. Even short breaks when you do them mindfully can help you reset your attention and come back to your work feeling refreshed.
Makes sense. This is all great stuff. But let's be real. We live in a world of constant stimulation. Is it even possible to get that deep focus when there are notifications, emails, and TikTok videos everywhere?
I know it's tough, but the important thing is to realize that our ability to focus isn't controlled by what's happening around us. It's about the choices we make. We might not be able to control the distractions, but we can control how we react to them.
So it's about building that mental muscle we talked about that helps us resist those tempting distractions.
Exactly, like you're developing a mental filter, letting in the important stuff and blocking out the noise.
I like that. But building a mental filter sounds like a long process.
Right.
What about right now when you're trying to focus and that notification pops up? Any tips for dealing with those distractions in the moment?
That's where a focus ritual can help.
A focus ritual. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's basically a set of things you do to signal to your brain that it's time to focus.
Okay.
Like creating a mental trigger to switch into focus mode. It could be something simple like making tea, putting on those noise-canceling headphones, dimming the lights, or even lighting a candle.
Oh, I like that. It's about creating a space, both physically and mentally, that helps you concentrate. I can see how those little things can make a big difference. What about those times when you have to focus for hours, like when you're working on a big project?
Yeah.
How do you keep that focus going?
That's where focus stamina comes in. Just like physical stamina, mental stamina takes training and consistency. You don't just run a marathon without working up to it.
So we have to train our brains to focus for longer periods.
Yep. Start with small goals. Don't try to force yourself to focus for hours right away. Maybe use the Pomodoro technique and slowly increase the time as you feel your focus getting stronger.
It's like a workout for your attention span. But what happens when you hit a wall? You know those times when you just can't focus no matter how hard you try?
That's when you need to take some time to reflect. The podcast talks about how important it is to pay attention to your own focus patterns. Like, notice when you tend to be most focused, what environments help you concentrate, and what distractions always seem to get you.
So becoming like a student of our own focus habits.
Exactly. It's about understanding your own rhythm and finding strategies that work for you. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
You know, I'm realizing that focus isn't just about getting things done. It's about living a more mindful and intentional life.
Absolutely. When we build our focus, we're not just becoming more efficient, we're also improving our ability to be present, to connect with others, and to really appreciate each moment.
Wow, I love that. So we've talked about intentional focus, single tasking, mindful breaks, focus rituals, stamina and reflection. I feel inspired, but also a little overwhelmed. What's next?
That's a great question, and the perfect way to move into the final part of our deep dive. We've talked about the how-tos of focus, but now let's talk about the why. We'll look at the connection between focus and creativity and uncover even more techniques for reaching peak performance.
I can't wait. Listeners, stay tuned. The most fascinating part of our focus journey is still ahead. All right, we're back for the final part of our focus journey. We've explored how to train our attention, but what can we actually do with this newfound focus superpower? What are the benefits?
That's where it gets really interesting. This podcast doesn't just talk about productivity, it actually connects focus with creativity. They're saying deep focus isn't just about getting things done, it's about unlocking our creative potential.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
But how does that actually work? I get that distractions kill creativity, but is focus really the magic ingredient?
Think about it. When we're always distracted, our minds are all over the place, jumping from one thing to another. There's no room for those deeper connections, those aha moments where creativity comes from. But when we're deeply focused, we create that mental space for insights to happen.
So it's not about forcing creativity, it's about setting the stage for it.
Exactly. The podcast uses this great analogy. Imagine planting a seed. You can't make it grow, but you can give it good soil, sunlight, and water. Deep focus is like that fertile soil for our creative seeds.
I like that. But sometimes even when I'm trying to be creative, I just get stuck. It's like my creative well dries up. What do we do then?
That's where incubation comes in. Have you ever noticed how you get your best ideas when you're not even trying to solve a problem? Like when you're taking a shower, going for a walk, or doing the dishes? Those can be prime times for creative breakthroughs.
You mean stepping away from the problem can actually help us solve it? That's kind of weird.
It is, but there's research to back it up. Incubation is about giving your subconscious mind time to work on things. When we stop consciously trying, our brains are still making connections, going through information and coming up with new ideas.
So it's like our brains are working on creative solutions in the background without us even knowing?
Exactly. The podcast suggests actually scheduling in time for incubation, like go for walks, take breaks, even just let your mind wander during those everyday tasks. You might be surprised what you come up with.
Okay, I'm adding incubation walks to my schedule. But speaking of schedules, this podcast also talks about procrastination. We all do it, but why? And how can we stop?
People often say procrastination is a bad thing, but the podcast has a more understanding view. They say it usually comes from a lack of clarity or a fear of failing.
That makes sense. When something feels overwhelming or you're scared of messing up, it's easier to just avoid it.
Right. Instead of being hard on yourself, they suggest getting curious about your procrastination. Like, what's the fear or uncertainty behind it? Maybe the task is just too big. Break it down into smaller steps.
So be strategic, but also be nice to ourselves.
Mhm.
I could do that. But what if procrastination is like a constant problem? Can we retrain our brains to be more action-oriented?
The podcast suggests thinking of procrastination as a chance to learn about yourself. By figuring out why you procrastinate, you can learn about your fears, anxieties, or beliefs that might be holding you back.
That's a totally different way of looking at it. Instead of seeing it as a personal failure, it's a sign that something needs to change.
Exactly. And they also talk about celebrating small wins. When we recognize our progress, even if it's just a tiny step, it motivates us and helps us keep going. It's like giving ourselves a reward for taking action instead of avoiding it.
This has been an amazing deep dive. We went from the science of distraction to intentional focus, from focus and creativity to beating procrastination. It feels like we've unlocked a whole new understanding of our minds.
It really has. And the main takeaway, I think, is this. Focus isn't just a productivity trick. It's a path to a more mindful, intentional, and fulfilling life.
I love that. So it's about being present, being creative, and really engaging with the world in a deeper way.
Right.
But if we had to give our listeners just one piece of advice, what would it be?
Start small. Pick one strategy, one tiny change to your routine that speaks to you, and stick with it. Maybe it's 5 minutes of mindfulness, setting a timer for focused work, or even just noticing when you get distracted.
That's great advice. It's not about changing everything at once. It's about taking small steps towards a more focused and fulfilling life.
And remember, focus is a skill. It takes practice, patience, and kindness to yourself. Some days you'll feel super focused. Other days, your mind will be all over the place. Just keep practicing, keep trying new things, and celebrate every win along the way.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that wraps up our epic deep dive into the power of focus. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as we did. It's been a blast exploring this with you, and I'm excited to see what other fascinating topics we get to dive into together.
It's been a pleasure. And remember, everyone, the power to focus is within you. Start working on it today and watch your life change.
Until next time, stay focused, stay curious, and keep diving deep.